All right, we'll go ahead and get started today. Thanks everyone for jumping on board. If you're coming in and you're not on mute, will you do everyone a favor and go ahead and mute yourself? This panel discussion today is put on by the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region Initiative. The NAR initiative, as we've kind of gotten the great acronym, is a initiative that is based out of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism here at Utah State. And it really is meant to be a resource to provide outdoor recreation planners, land managers, and city and municipal leaders in gateway communities with data, information, and resources that allow them to better plan for and prepare for shifts in outdoor recreation visitation. And so one thing that we have all experienced probably in our professional and hopefully in our personal lives is that the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly shifted the ways that we participate in outdoor recreation. It's shifted the volume of outdoor recreation that's occurring on our parks and our greenways. And it's also shifted where people are going. So the purpose of this panel today, which is being recorded and will be made available to everyone who has registered for the Utah Outdoor Recreation Summit next week, which is being put on by the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. And so we really thank them in their willingness to be able to share this discussion with all of their constituents who will be online and participating in that virtual summit next week. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we have noticed over the past several months is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really shifted the volume and where and how people are participating in outdoor recreation. And this hasn't just happened in our local municipalities, it's happened in our state parks and in our national parks. So the panel today is really meant to bring together some diverse perspectives from municipal parks and recreation systems, county parks and recreation systems, the state park system, as well as some observations of what has happened in the national parks that are located in Utah. So I'm going to start out with some very brief introductions of our panelists today, and they're going to go ahead and give a little bit more detailed introduction to themselves and the work that they do. And then we're going to launch into some questions about the ways that them and their constituents have experienced changes in the ways that outdoor recreation is occurring within Utah. So I'm going to start off with Jim Price. Jim is the active transportation planner with the Mountain Land Association of Governments. Jim?
Thank you, Jordan. My name is Jim Price of Mountain Land Association of Governments located in Orem. We serve Utah County, Wasatch County, and the eastern part of Summit County for a number of interlocal services that the cities or the counties are unable to do by themselves. My main task with MAG is transportation planning, and within that is bike and pedestrian planning for active transportation. I've been at MAG for going on 21 years, and I've been dealing with trail development, mostly urban trail development, for most of that time, but get my hands dirty once in a while up in the backcountry as well.
Great, thanks, Jim. Next, I'm going to introduce Jeremy Shaw. Jeremy is the manager out at Antelope Island State Park. Jeremy?
Yeah, so Jeremy Shaw, Antelope Island State Park. I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I've been out here at Antelope Island since 2011. So my job is just kind of everything that goes on out here, managing the people, managing the resources. That includes campgrounds and historic sites and all that good stuff. So I'm looking forward to participating today, and thanks for asking me to join.
Good, thanks, Jeremy. Next, someone who is very close by, at least in the same town as me, my fellow colleague here at Utah State University, Zach Miller.
Hey everyone, my name is Zach. I'm an assistant professor up at USU, like Jordan said, and most of my research and teaching focuses on parks and protected areas and wildlife resources. And so I help managers make science-informed decisions using social science concepts. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Great, thanks, Zach. And as most of the people on the call probably know, Utah State University has a wide array of regional campuses, and one of those campuses is based out of Moab. And our newest faculty member here at Utah State and with the Institute is Wayne Fryman. Wayne is based out of that Moab campus. So Wayne,
I know you.
Wayne, you're muted.
Take two. I'm Wayne, everybody. I'm in Moab, Utah State. I'm academically in the same department as Zach and Jordan and a few of the others. I arrived here in April. My route was 23 years in Montana, 3 years at Clemson in South Carolina, and then here to Moab. I went out east and couldn't live without the mountains and got lucky and got back here. My research and teaching has generally been associated with visitor management, a lot of that in national parks, and I've been involved in issues of carrying capacity, visitor use, regulations, and those sorts of things for a long time. So I'm thrilled to be here and to meet you all. I've only been here since April. I'm going to talk about Moab. There's probably many people on this call that can pitch in and help me out, and you're more than welcome to. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Wayne. So just to give everyone an idea of the structure of today's panel discussion, we're planning on about 45 minutes of panel discussion amongst the panelists, where they're going to share their experiences of how visitation has shifted for the parks and protected areas that they're working with. And then we're going to have about 15 minutes of open Q&A. So in the panel discussion, if you have any questions that come up, you can go ahead and type those into the chat box into the Zoom screen there. So if you don't have your chat dialog box open, you can open it there at the bottom of your screen. There's a bar with a chat button, and you can open and type your question in there. And then once the panel discussion is over, we'll come back to it and address your questions. So we'll go through some predefined questions that we've already set up. And the first one is meant for Jim. Jim, back in early March, many of Utahns started to shift the ways that they were getting outside. And a lot of that came as a result of the governor's stay safe, stay home recommendations. So how have you seen trail use change, particularly in Summit, Utah, and Wasatch counties?
Thanks, Jordan. You want to bring up that, do you have that presentation or the slide deck?
Yeah, I will get you going.
Bring that up real quick. Just go to the second slide. We have been, just for background, we have been measuring the number of users on our urban trail network since about 2011. We have automated counters that we use. We don't have them on every trail in the county. And this is a sampling of 5 trails in the county. We would monitor about 10. There are more than that here. So this is just, again, this is a sampling of what we're seeing. On the left in the blue is what we saw last year, 2019. That was kind of an average year, the usage levels for these 5 trails. The orange is what we saw beginning in April when we started counting, getting our new counts for the year. And ending up in June, we're working on our July figures. What you'll see is that in April, we more than doubled. In fact, is about 2.5 times as many users as normal, from 60,000 trips to 160,000 trips. In May, from about 80,000, and we dropped a little bit, which was kind of surprising in May, to only 150,000. June, we did drop again to about 140,000, but we're still up 40% in June over what we were in 2019 on an average year. So let's say that this drops off again in July by that same amount. We're going to still be up by 30 to 35% over a normal year in our urban trail use. in talking with I don't actually manage the trails, the cities and the county do the management of these trails. And in talking with these trail management groups and with their parks and rec departments, what they're finding is that people are really tremendously loving having these trails available. And we've had a kind of a sudden discovery of something that we've had in our urban areas for quite a while, is this trail system. And the parks departments, the county, they weren't quite ready for that. They've had to double their manpower in some cases, or at least not double their manpower, double their man hours in maintaining, in keeping the restrooms clean, in patrolling, trying to kind of keep things under control on these trails. We haven't seen an increase in accidents or an increase in user incidents, anything like that. Nothing bad. It's just that trying to keep up with that level of use has been difficult. You go to any questions on that? If you go to the next one, Jordan. Let me see some observations that we're seeing. These are the major issues as parking. We have, for instance, on the Murdoch Canal Trail, which is probably the premier trail in Utah County. It runs 18 miles from Provo, north end of Provo, to Lehi and connects the Provo River Trail with the Jordan River Trail. We have six parking lots, six full-size, full-service trailheads with parking and restrooms. On those, the parking lots are jam-packed. The restrooms are jam-packed. Maintenance has been an issue. Social distancing has been an issue, of course, with COVID. Illegal trail building is something else I'll get into because that doesn't have to do with our urban trail system. But the observation, let's go down to the next one, if you will, Jordan. I've also had some discussions with some of the people I work with in Wasatch County, where urban trails are not what they're talking about. They're talking about the backcountry trails. They're talking about hiking trails, biking trails, mountain bike trails. I had a very good discussion with the manager of Wasatch Mountain State Park, Tracy C. And some things, just as an example of what she's seeing, is that they'll have a parking lot at a trailhead that can handle 30 cars. And she will see that the parking lot is full and count 100 cars parked on the road, side of the road, going up to the trailhead. And so the level of use is just astounding. It's currently unsustainable, obviously, with what we have and with the resources that they have. And we're not expecting that those levels will stay that high. I think this is maybe a one-off, but I think what we are expecting is that, this question, is this a temporary or we're going to see sustained use levels? And we think that people are discovering, either discovering for the first time or maybe all over again, that trails in Utah are a widespread, wonderful amenity and quality of life enhancement. And many people have been, as I've talked to a number of our bike shop owners, they can't keep bikes in stock. There's two reasons for that. One is that they didn't order enough stock, because on an average year, they'll order ahead their stock. This year not being an average, people are out buying bikes like crazy. And people are finding, and they're buying high-end bikes, they're buying low-end bikes, they're buying mid-range, they're buying everything out. Some of the bike shops are now closed because they don't have any inventory. The only thing they can do is fix your bike when you get a flat tire or you bust a spoke or something like that. And so the first part of the year was wonderful. It was great for them. And so that's just an illustration of the investments that people have made in equipment. And now what are they going to do with that equipment that they've invested so much money in? Are they going to continue to use that? These are new investments. This is not old stuff. And going forward, sorry, my voice is breaking up a little bit. Going forward, the maintenance crew is going to be big enough? Are the staffing budgets going to be big enough? Some of our people are looking at actually hiring outside crews to help them maintain, especially the backcountry or the mountain bike trails, because they don't have the capacity to do that, and they don't have the volunteer capacity. It's one of the other questions on there, is they have a limited volunteer capacity, and they're finding that they don't have enough volunteers to help maintain those. And so that's going to be, if we're going to just make a jump, like I said, we jumped in April by 250%. Let's say for the rest of the year, we only jumped by 20%. We're already essentially at capacity for a lot of these facilities, long before COVID hit. How was that going to impact? And so these are just some questions that I'm bringing out as opposed to answers, but we'll hopefully talk about those in the Q&A session.
Great, thanks, Jim. It's really valuable to have that perspective from urban systems where visitor use monitoring practices aren't always in place. So actually to have some quantifiable data on how much visitation has changed is really valuable. Jeremy, I want to jump to you now. Jim had touched a little bit on the experiences of state park managers. So in Utah, the state park system had a little bit of a phased transition into how they were dealing with COVID, initially closing down visitation to restricting visitation to everybody who was within a county of a specific state park or where that state park was located. And then later, I think it was later in April or maybe early May, they phased in opening those regulations up to different regions of the state. Could you walk us through that process and kind of the broader picture of the ways that state parks have experienced shifts in visitation and how those regulations actually worked?
Sure. Yeah, and some of this will maybe echo a little bit what Jim said, but I almost see it as a three-step process or phase that we went through. Initially, when the governor put out his directives, state parks decided to follow those directives. And the initial one was just to kind of stay home. And when that directive came out, our parks got just slammed, just inundated. At Antelope Island specifically, we had a 3-hour wait to get in the park. We backed traffic halfway up Antelope Drive. Places like Sand Hollow and Goblin Valley were closing their gates by 10 a.m. because they were so busy. And that was prior to that whole recreate in your own county order that the governor put out. So that initial impact was just huge for us. And we were seeing, Zion and Arches type lines to get into the parks. And then he came out with that recreate in your own county order, and that actually brought visitation maybe more to a little bit of a normal level for that time of year because we were turning people away at our gates. So that handled the visitation a little bit, but it also brought some huge challenges with campers, people that had already made reservations. We had to call and cancel reservations and refund money and turn people around that were traveling to come visit our parks. And so that brought its own kind of set of issues to deal with, but it did kind of level off what I would call normal visitation for Antelope Island anyway, during that time of year. And now currently we're kind of back into, like you talked about, regionally open, and now we're kind of wide open. And as we did that, what I think happened is while we were under the county restrictions, people rediscovered their parks. Like Jim said, people may have come out for the first time because they're looking at a list of places they can recreate in their county, and there may be 1 or 2 places, and here they come. Or they haven't been here for a long time, and they decided that they would come visit again. So I think there's been this big kind of rediscovery of our local parks and places to recreate. at the same time, now we're open to everybody. And so we've got the locals that are using the place like crazy. We've also got people that are coming from all over the place. And so our visitation has been up quite a bit this year since the county restrictions came off. Especially our water-based parks. Our water-based parks it's not uncommon for us to close those during the week when that's typical to be a Saturday or a Sunday thing. We're now closing lots of our water-based parks during the week. So I think on top of the people that would travel to come visit, the locals are jumping in as well. And we're just seeing lots and lots of visitation piled on from the surrounding area as well as the local folks. So that's kind of how I think we responded to that. Our southern Utah parks saw a huge jump when the restrictions came off, the county-wide restrictions came off, because especially if they're close to the border, a lot of people were traveling across state lines to recreate because their state may be locked down, but Utah may not. And so some of our southern Utah parks were getting double their visitation because half of that was coming from, say, Nevada, and then they were trying to handle their normal visitation as well.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. I know Jim talked a little bit about the ways that municipal parks and recreation systems have put in place some safeguards to prevent or lessen the possibility of transmission of the virus. Has there been any broad ways that the state park system has done that, as far as closing specific facilities or changing hours, or more informal ways of managing visitation so that in-person contact, or so that socially distancing guidelines can be adhered to?
Yeah, so we've done a little bit of everything, I think. Obviously, we're following the CDC recommendations as far as disinfecting frequently touched surfaces, and we've got our staff going through restrooms and stuff like that, 3 and 4 and 5 times a day, where they may have traditionally hit it once a day. We've got our staff wearing masks, plexiglass shields at entrance stations and gift shops, visitor centers, stuff like that. In addition, we've canceled programs that are drawing more than, say, 20 to 50 people. If it's much larger than that, we've canceled them. If it was something that was already going on that we thought that we could still pull off with a decent social distance barrier, we've done we've had a CDC compliance form that we filled out for tracing and stuff like that. So we've done a lot of those things that everybody's kind of doing when it comes to COVID. We've also started limiting numbers. So we've started setting capacities at a lot of our parks. And so where we would have tried to accommodate everybody in the past, a lot of times if parking spots are full, they're full and we're turning people away. They asked us to down the capacity by 1/3. And so that's kind of where we're at is if we feel like we're getting crowded at some of our state parks, we'll start turning people away and just say we're at capacity. The other thing that we did was start doing some ticket sales online and stuff like that to try and get folks to purchase prior to coming out. We've transitioned some areas that were traditionally maybe beach camping, kind of overflow beach camping areas at some of our parks, and turned those back into day use only, just in an effort to let the people that are there day using spread out more effectively. A good example, Jordanelle is offering like a text alert option. You can sign up, you get a text on your phone, and you can find out what the capacity of the park is right there if they're ready to turn people away or not. So we've done a little bit of everything. As you know, this thing changes minute to minute, day to day, and so our park managers on the ground are just trying to react to that as effectively as we can to keep our visitors safe, but let them recreate in the most responsible way we possibly can. One other thing, we've made a few different changes to kind of accommodate the locals, I guess, a little bit, to where we changed the price on a local pass versus now to state pass, and try to accommodate some of those folks a little bit more. But it's ever changing, and we're trying to react and adapt minute by minute.
Great, thanks, Jerry. I know that you guys are probably one of the hardest hit, or you've seen those impacts directly the most out of probably most of the state parks within Utah. And Antelope Island is probably one of, if not the most accessible state park in being, located right on the Wasatch Front, so close to where the vast majority of the population within the state actually lives. So we've talked kind of about two different experiences here, kind of urban proximate state park and the experience of these municipal parks and recreation systems. I want to jump now to some of the more rural or remote locations of the state. I mentioned that Wayne was our newest faculty member down at Utah State University in Moab. And Wayne, you moved in, I think it was mid or early March, so right in the middle or right at the beginning of the pandemic. And Grand County, the county which Moab is located, has really had a unique and very proactive in many ways a way of dealing with the pandemic. Can you kind of walk us through that process and what your experience has been moving directly into a gateway community, and one that has been really on top of it in the ways that they have tried to limit the transmission of the disease and really protect locals?
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, we arrived here in the very 1st of April, so the end of March, and driving into Moab, which is a town that I've been in and out of many times over the last 20 years or 30 years. It was like driving into a school with no students. The streets were basically empty. Commerce had all but come to a halt. There were limitations on being able to go to get housing or restaurants, and basically the things that make this town click. So it was a very bizarre, I guess, way to meet a new community. And so Jordan, I think if you can go to these slides I gave you, we'll kind of work through that. And so if you go to the Discover Moab website, the first message you'll get is that we are open now. I mean, the resources that draw people here are available. And the second message that'll come very strongly, and I think this is indicative of what the community is trying to do, is to stay safe, to stay open. And so in this case, there's this montage of all these people that have masks on that are demonstrating the different kind of functionality of Moab and the opportunities for experiences that are here. And it literally is our economy and our culture that's going to close down if we can't keep it safe. And the notion of staying safe is taken very seriously here. So, could you go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit about the Moab adventure. Our first case was March 27th, so just a few days before I got here. And they had already been quite proactive in many ways. And so as of yesterday, I think, or the day before yesterday, we now have 53 confirmed cases in Grand County. And what I thought was interesting of that, when I looked at the Moab hospital part of it, 48 residents and 24 were non-residents. So the county hospital has been receiving people that are positive for COVID that are not counted in the tallies that people are making about this. And so people are definitely bringing the infection to the community, which is, as you all know, part of the anxiety of all this. Within that, the dominant age band, I think 30 of those 53 people were in the 25 to 44-year-old age. So we've got a lot of young travelers. And unfortunately, a couple of days ago, we had our first death. Now, an interesting, just looking at that data thing to me was that once we did fully start getting back into business and opening up, we've escalated the pace at which we're seeing cases here. And so about half of what we have has occurred in the last month. So if you could go to the next slide, please. we're open now, but we definitely lost the spring season for the most part. We don't have great numbers in Moab. It's one of the things that I'm going to work on trying to pull together as a better overall picture. But this is the visitation to arches comparing to 2019 and 2020. And if you look at January and February, 2020 actually looked like it was on the rise compared to last year's visitation. But in March, the shutdowns across the country started to happen. The policies began to come into place, and visitation to arches was down 50,000 people. And by April, another 168,000, and in May, another 200,000. So, I don't have good data here available yet for June or July or August, but certainly for the spring, the loss of 400,000 visitors to the community, and this is just an indicator, it doesn't count the folks that might have come here and not gone to Arches, that would have been here for the Jeep Safari and all the other kinds of things that would have been happening during the spring break, was a substantial hit. You know, for a community of this size, the economic reality of that is staggering. Just to think that we're going to take that much commerce out of circulation. So next, please. So, you know, we had our kind of key times. April was sort of the stay at home, stay safe month. Things were pretty much closed down. Rentals were closed, you know, short-term overnight was closed. The hotels were empty. The takeout was all that was available for food, and you could only stay if you were, you know, fatigued and desperate for a night. And the big event that was happening in April was Easter, and you know, the guidance that we were getting then was go for a hike. Okay, don't go hang out with a bunch of people. Get outside, go for a hike. And that echoed the kind of guidance I think that the country was getting. And there was an impression that, you know, that was the safe thing that you could still do. And by listening to the numbers on your trails and at Antelope Island, people took it seriously. Here, there aren't so many people in our county. So like Dead Horse Point State Park, I went up there several times when I was the only one there or amongst a small group of visitors. But then I went up on Memorial Day weekend and couldn't find a comfortable social distancing option there. So it was pretty full. So and people didn't have masks on and all that. So we actually went somewhere else that day. So in May, we moved to yellow and the lodging opened up. RV parks started to open up with restrictions, 30%, 50%, 72-hour waits between rooms. And that's when I saw the visitation really start coming in, but an awful lot of it was from Colorado and Utah still. So we're pretty close to Colorado, and we were getting quite a bit from there. The town still felt pretty empty. And when the parks opened on the 29th, if you can go to the next slide, please, there weren't that, I mean, the parking lots still seemed empty in the hotels. There weren't that many people, but within a couple of hours of Arches opening up on the 29th, they were overwhelmed by visitation. And actually, I went out, I thought, oh, I'll take a leisurely look that morning. I'll go out and see whether there's some social distancing happening and how the visitors are behaving and that sort of thing. And this is what we ran into. The park was full, said, please come back. And that sustained for a few days like that, where they had to actually cut things back. And I think that there were certainly time lags between staffing up to being prepared to deal with all of a sudden a lot of people coming and all the stutter steps associated with this crazy pandemic. So next slide, please. So, you know, I think some of the impacts, and there's just so many of them in a community like this, there's clearly economic anguish in that you know, my next door neighbor owns a restaurant in town, and you know, they were very unsure if they were going to make it. And that also extends to the public sector. You know, we've had to lay off people working in our recreation department, lay off I think even a policeman. And the budgets are really strained by taking that much commerce out of the system. And at the same time, considerable social concern about the health of our community and our neighbors and our friends. So it's this really impossible, I think, kind of tension that we're dealing with. You know, whether you had a job or lost your job, working at home, kids out of school, there's just a real palpable kind of set of anxieties that go along with all of this. And you know, there's certainly difference of opinion here, but about how we should be dealing with all of this. But I got to admit, watching this community respond, they were extremely constructive, I think, for the most part. There was a lot of tolerance in the face, I think, of a lot of worry. So that's the news from Moab, at least for spring. And I think Zach can tell us a little bit more about the visitation in Arches now and Canyonlands, but because he's been out in the park a couple times recently. But it's not fully back to action. I can just sense that from being around town.
Great, thanks, Wayne. It's great to have that local perspective. Zach, I know you've been doing some recent research in the park to try to understand how visitors are actually responding now that they are able to recreate within the park boundaries. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges that the park managers are facing in trying to enforce some of these changes, as far as allowing people or providing opportunities for people to meet social distancing guidelines, to recreate responsibly, while dealing with existing infrastructure that oftentimes wasn't actually set up to do that.
Sure. I think I would just echo all the other panelists here is there's pretty similar things happening in national parks. As Wayne said, once it opened back up, there was quite a high demand for it, as Jeremy indicated, in Antelope Island. And so parks are faced with the same challenge of having higher levels of visitor use. I think that one of the things about Arches is that our national parks, for the most part, are really set up to funnel people into certain areas of the parks. And so they are also dealing with that. As Wayne alluded to, there's changes with staffing. So a lot of parks have had to reduce their amount of staff because they want to make sure they have enough housing to let people be socially distanced in their own living spaces in case they do need to quarantine or something like that. And so there's no official numbers out for some of these parks right now, but it's certainly being in the parks looks quite busy. I will say I was talking with both managers in the parks as well as local community members, and it seems like international visitation has taken quite a dip. But when I was in Arches, I heard, one of my favorite things about parks is it's like being in the United Nations on some of these trails. There's so many different languages being spoken. And I definitely experienced that when I was in Arches. There are still several hundreds of people moving through these trail systems in Arches every hour. And so, to be completely honest, it feels like not too much has changed on the trails from kind of that visitor use or experiential aspects. Certainly more people are wearing masks in those areas. The only things that are still restricted in Arches are the visitor center is still ostensibly closed. You can't go in there and look at any exhibits or go to the ranger desk. Rangers out front of the parks. And the fiery furnace area is closed to both park guided tours and private access. That's a narrow slot canyon where people would inevitably come in contact with each other moving those directions. So I think they closed fiery furnace as well, but everything else is open in the park. They've got quite a bit of signage. And as Jim alluded to earlier, they've definitely upkept the cleaning of their bathrooms and maintenance and all sorts of stuff. In fact, I've never seen bathrooms so clean as at Arches National Park right now in a park system. I mean, they're pretty spotless. So I think that's more or less how parks, at least Arches National Park, is adapting to this as in terms of visitor use.
Great, thanks, Zach. I know you have a video kind of showcasing the work that you're doing in Arches, and it's probably very applicable to a lot of the issues that other managers are facing in other national parks around the state. You want us to show that one now?
Sure, go ahead.
Protecting geographically explicit regions through legal or other means to conserve resources for both ecological and social values is one of the largest global actions in history. All but 4 countries in the world have at least one protected area, and 15% of the Earth's surface is designated as a protected area. And in Utah, we are lucky enough to have some of the highest concentrations of protected areas in the world, and people have definitely noticed.
In the last 5 years alone, over 1 billion people have visited our national parks in the United States. That's more than every attendee to NFL, NBA, MLB, MLS, and NASCAR events combined. And this high amount of use takes a high amount of science-informed management.
If you were to go to most national parks and ask them how many visitors are hiking on trails, most parks wouldn't be able to tell you a clear answer. So we're helping provide technical assistance, and Arches National Park, where we're here today, is one of the busiest in the entire national park system. We're here helping managers understand visitor use to this windows area of the park. What we do is we use infrared trail counters to count the number of people, and we calibrate those counters with some trail cameras to make sure that we're being accurate with that. The infrared counters, for instance, if people are walking shoulder to shoulder in a group, won't be able to catch all of those people. We calibrate the times from the trail counters with the times from the cameras that we have, and we use those two things together to produce a data set that allows us to accurately assess the number of people in that area. Managers often try to provide a variety of recreational opportunities in a place, places that have opportunities for solitude, places that have opportunity for family togetherness, places that have opportunity for great photographs as well.
The second thing that we're doing is we're looking at how different characteristics of places like trails influences people's ability to socially distance during the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the things we're looking at is how trail width actually influences visitor behavior. So right here, this trail is about 15 feet. As we move up this trail, it goes to about 8 feet, and then up at the very top there, it drops down to even smaller than that. So we want to see how people are able to keep that 6-foot distance between each other and their groups. The other things we're looking at are group size and the density of visitors, the number of people using the trail at that time, and how that influences people's ability to socially distance.
And with collaboration from faculty down at the USU Moab campus, we're also looking into the future. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything about visitor use in parks and protected areas, it's that access to places for outdoor recreation, like our national parks, provide an essential service for human health and well-being. We are looking to see how these results might generalize to other parks and protected areas so managers can better understand how to create socially distanced, safe opportunities for visitors.
If you have questions about this project or want to know more information, please feel free to contact either myself, Zach Miller, or Wayne Fryman.
Thanks for that video, Zach. That was awesome. I want to open it up to the panel for some general discussions. The first one is the unintended consequences that have happened as a result of a lot of the management actions that have been taken to respond to COVID. I know, Jim, you talked about this a little bit with closing down restroom facilities, and Zach, you had talked about it a little bit in both your comments and in the video of the inability of park managers to really provide safe opportunities for outdoor recreation when the infrastructure that they were responsible for managing doesn't actually have those opportunities built in or doesn't enable that. Is there any of these unintended consequences that have been seen as a result of management actions that have been taken to make people or to give people safe outdoor recreation opportunities? And what are those unintended consequences, and how are they currently being addressed?
I think with us originally, well, we were getting just people coming out like crazy, and they were congregating at trailheads and stuff like that. So that's part of it. There's no real good way to get people to social distance at a trailhead, but we're doing our best. We've got a lot of signage up, and then setting those capacities, setting those limiting capacities is what we're trying to do to kind of mitigate that. I think it was great that people wanted to get outside and use their natural places, and then we're trying to let them do that as safely as we possibly can. The other major consequence for us, honestly, is just like we're calling it COVID burnout. You know what I mean? We've been doing this thing for so long, and disinfecting restrooms, every 2 hours, and trying to maintain all of the safety precautions and stuff that we're doing it, and we're still doing a good job, and the staff at state parks is still grinding through it. But you can tell that it's been a long summer with the folks that are working with us, just sticking with it. So that's the biggest thing for us is, I think we did things as well as we could with the information that we had. And now we're trying to adapt on the fly and just hanging in there and trying to keep going.
Wayne, Zach, Jim, any other comments on that one?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this is me kind of thinking like a scientist, but I think one of the things that is interesting to me is that some parks are creating restrictions right now on visitor use. I mean, Antelope Island is, but this is happening in some of these other national parks, whether it's Rocky Mountain. I think Zion might be using a timed entry system right now. And all of those are systems that have been talked about, particularly in the National Park Service for several years, about a way to manage visitor use. And I think it allows us two opportunities to look into. One is, where are those people going once these kind of quota systems are built up? So are they spilling over into BLM lands? Are they recreating on forests? Are they going to Dead Horse, for instance? I mean, how are people moving about those systems at kind of a landscape level? And I also think it provides us opportunities to kind of evaluate if these are actually going to help reduce some of the issues related to visitor use in our parks right now. So just anecdotally, what is happening in some parks is that they've created a quota system for people to enter into the parks, and yet the places that have been busy are still really busy. And so it's kind of making us think about how effective some of these actions can actually be as well. So I think there's two like unforeseen opportunities that will be able to help us move beyond the COVID-19 pandemic to better manage visitor use.
Great, thanks, Zach.
I think I'd add to that, Jordan, that, we talk about displacement all the time, and it's a very difficult thing to study because, it's hard to catch people in big enough numbers to really be confident in knowing that this many people came from there or whatever. And this clearly is going to give us a lot of opportunity to come back and look at that. If when we do get a chance to dig in, I know somebody asked, who are these new visitors, that are all of a sudden showing up? And I think that's a really great question. Are they just people that are pent up and they got to get out because they're pulling their hair out? Or are they folks that really had planned on going somewhere else, and this is it? Can't go to Europe, can't go do a lot of the things that people had planned to do. So we need to stay within a one-day drive so that we don't have to stay in a hotel or something like that. And so did they just change their behavior? Or are they really new people?
That's a great point, Wayne. And Jim, maybe you have some insights to that as well. I know that's something that we definitely have experienced here in Logan, when most of the outdoor recreation opportunities are so close. It makes them so much more appealing for families to get to, especially for these families who early in the spring or in the mid portion of the spring had to pull their kids out of school, and all of a sudden they have to find ways to entertain their kids, or now they're working from home, they have these increased opportunities for getting outside. I know that we've seen definite shift in the kind of the socio-demographic characteristics of who those visitors are, at least here in Logan. I don't have any specific data on that, but Jim, maybe you have some experience with that as well in the counties that you work with. I know we've seen a lot more of the social opportunities or the family opportunities really being taken advantage of on our local recreation systems. Is that kind of the case that are you seeing a similar trend there in the counties that you work with, Jim?
Jordan, I think that what we're seeing is more of the same, if you will, in the urban areas as opposed to, say, in the state parks or the national parks. We are essentially open access. There's no way to close a trail down. Really, there's no way to close the facilities down because they have access points at every crossing street on these facilities. And so the challenge is more for the local managers is how to deal with however many people come. We can't control how many people come. So dealing with that is just making sure that there are enough staff to keep the restrooms clean, to keep the parking lots in good repair and in order. As far as the demographics of the trail users go, yes, we have definitely seen a lot of family use, a lot more families in total. They'll bring their kids out with them. One of the things that we've done in the past is that we actually do what we call intercept surveys on the trails, and we'll get people to stop, which is an art in and of itself, getting people to stop on a trail to talk to you and fill out a survey. And what we have been finding is that, at least during the summertime, about 75% of our trips on these trails are by people 35 and older. So it's not a ton of kids. It's not a ton of family get out and go. It's a lot of individuals. It's a lot of friends. It's a lot of groups. And these are sometimes middle-aged and a lot of older people, 65 and older. And we're seeing that same thing happen. But I think temporarily we're seeing more kids. One of the interesting things, though, that we're seeing is that a lot of these urban trails tie into our mountain bike parks, the pump parks, and some of the mountain bike parks, like in Orem, their mountain bike park, and in Pleasant Grove, Valley Vista. And because the high school mountain bike teams are one of the largest groups in the country, and Utah has one of the largest number of high school mountain bike teams, we're seeing them on the urban trails as they are riding to the mountain bike trails, which I think is great. And I think great that we're connected and interconnected. But I think that the family use, yeah, it's up, but that's just observationally. We don't have any way to really determine the difference because, again, we don't have any way to close off traffic or gate and sit at a gate and count and see who's coming through exactly without doing these surveys. And because of COVID, we've not been able to go out and do our intercept surveys.
Great, thanks, Jim. I want to end on one question on getting perspectives on the management solutions for dealing with this increased use. I know, Jim, you brought it up early on, and Jeremy, you kind of alluded it too, in that it's a distinct possibility that, you know, we've seen visitation to municipal parks and recreation systems increase. We've seen visitation to our state park systems increase, and we've seen visitation now that the national parks are back open and starting to trend up again, even though it hasn't hit normal numbers, as Wayne showed. What are the management solutions that that are specifically being explored. I know, Zach, you had mentioned the timed entry system, I think that's being tested out now in Zion for their shuttle system. Jeremy, what's the discussion right now within state parks about tempering or introducing management solutions to address this increasing demand? Is it a fee-based solution? Is there quotas being put in? Is it just keeping close monitors on the times that the park gates are open?
I think there's a little bit of everything that's going to happen, and that's a good question. As far as quotas, they haven't really set carrying capacity limits at any of our parks so far. What they've mostly done, and when they asked us, when the governor's office and our administration asked us to kind of reduce numbers coming into the parks by a third, what we typically did at most of our parks was look at those areas that had been overflow areas in the past, where we would have put people, when we kind of ran out of enough space in the normal area, we would use an overflow area, whether it be a beach area to put campers or a gravel area to park boaters at a boating park. And what we did for the most part is kind of eliminate those. So instead of utilizing those overflow areas that we had traditionally used, we quit using them. And that was sufficient to knock those numbers down by that third or whatever our target was. We're also looking at some other types of fee structures where coming out of this, it may be more expensive at a peak time to get into a park than it would be at an off-peak time, say during the week versus a weekend, or a holiday weekend versus non-holiday weekend. So there's a little bit of all of that going on. Our administration's pretty good about allowing us to work through some of that. At Antelope Island specifically, we haven't had to put any quota stuff on. One thing we have a lot of out here is space. And so we don't get that space limited or even parking limited. But it's a huge deal for most of our boating parks. And so they're taking a really hard look at that to where they're going to maybe scale back the numbers of people that they allow in, or do a creative fee schedule, or a little bit of both.
Zach and Wayne, any perspectives on what you see coming down the pipe for national parks as possible solutions that they might explore?
Sure. I think what I would say is that visitor use has been a chronic issue in national parks for a long time. The first time someone used the quote, "parks are being loved to death," was in the 1950s. And, parks are still around today. So I think this is, we can respond to the tip of this iceberg as this one-off scenario, but I think more generally speaking, parks should really start to invest on building the capacity to use science-informed frameworks to manage visitor use. That includes things like, focusing on outputs instead of inputs, and being able to evaluate the effectiveness of the management actions that they do put in place. So I would say more broadly, it'd be about the parks being able to better manage and tinker with the parts of the system in visitor use management.
Depending on the area of the facility. But how do we better manage these going forward? And one of the things that Wayne brought up, and this is believe it or not, even in the urban areas, this is a controversial thing, and that's how do we deal with e-bikes? One of the things that we're dealing with here are also scooters, the rentable scooters. Those are everywhere here in Utah County and Salt Lake County. But the reason I bring up e-bikes is that a lot of people are upset that e-bikes are even allowed on the mountain bike trails. Are they doing damage? Are they ruining the experience for everyone else? Or are they opening up new experiences to people who otherwise couldn't get out? Maybe they're older, maybe they're not as in good shape, or maybe like some friends of mine who really like to mountain bike, but they can't do like they used to. They love their new e-bikes because they can get out and go and do it more comfortably and just have as much fun.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I know we're running close on our time. Hopefully we've gotten to most everyone's questions. Just so everyone knows, this session is being recorded. We're going to send it back out to everyone if you want to share it with any of your colleagues that weren't able to make it today. The Gateway and Natural Amenity Region Coordinator is also going to type up a summary, and we'll have a summary that we're able to send around as well. And then also, if you're a part of the Utah Outdoor Recreation Summit, or if one of your colleagues is part of the Utah Outdoor Recreation Summit next week, it's going to be part of the sessions that's included in that summit. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists. We've had a great discussion today. This is a very unique time to be doing research on parks and protected areas, to be managing parks and protected areas. And I think we're just in the middle of this, and so just to see where we're able to come out on the end or on the backside will definitely be an interesting process to see it actually all play out. So Wayne, Zach, Jim, and Jeremy, thanks again for your time today, and thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.